Hi, it's Gerry, and welcome to day 223 of A Course in Miracles. The lesson for today is, God is my life. I have no life but His. The reflection states, I was mistaken when I thought I lived apart from God, a separate entity that moved, a separate eternity that moved in isolation, unattached, and housed within a body. Now I know my life is God's. I have no other home. I do not exist apart from Him. He has no thoughts that are not part of me, and I have none but those which are of Him. And the prayer says, Our Father, let us see the face of Christ instead of our mistakes. For we who are your holy Son are sinless. We would look upon our sinlessness, for guilt proclaims that we are not your Son, and we would not forget you longer. We are lonely here and long for heaven, where we are at home. Today we would return. Our name is yours. Name is capital, yours is capital. And we acknowledge that we are your Son, capital Y, capital S. And as I reflected on this through the day, I was reminded of the story of the prodigal son, which is really what this is. If we think about it, the prodigal son, that story that Jesus told of the prodigal son, it was very radical in his time, because the son would never do that to his father. And it emphasized the love of God. But as I reflect on this in A Course in Miracles, I see that there's something even much deeper in that story, because the son took what his father gave him and squandered it and saw himself as a sinner and was ashamed, and then, lived with the swines, feeding the swines, which again was quite radical for people who considered pigs as unclean. And then finally said, you know what, I'm going to go back to my father. And then went with this story that, Father, I'm not worthy to be called your son. And the reaction of the father was just what we would expect in this understanding of A Course in Miracles. He didn't care about all that stuff. He was like, put a ring on his finger, my son has returned. There is no sin. There was no need for him to be forgiven. The father just said, come on, let's kill the fatted calf, let's celebrate, you are my son. And people had a hard time understanding that. The older brother had a hard time understanding that. But in the context of this Course in Miracles, it totally makes sense. That is God. There is no sin. That isolation from God, that separateness from God, is our own illusion. God is love. God is always there. God doesn't condemn. God doesn't need to forgive because there's no sin. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. And it makes even more sense now that I study this Course in Miracles. I've always loved the story of a prodigal son. Maybe it's because I like the Rolling Stones rendition of the Reverend Wilkins song. Actually, it was I have it here. It was actually written by the Reverend Robert Wilkins, and the Rolling Stones redid it in 1968. But that song always, and that story always spoke to me. And now I think I understand why. Because it's just a story of the love of God. Just like this lesson is a lesson of the love of God. Again, For we who are your holy Son are sinless. We will look upon our sinlessness. For guilt proclaims that we are not your Son. Just like the Son said, Father, I don't deserve to be called your Son. And we would not forget you longer. We are lonely here, just like the Son was lonely, feeding pigs. We are lonely here and long for heaven. We long to be back with you, just again, like the Son said, where we are at home. Today we would return. Our name is yours, and we acknowledge that we are your Son. Beautiful. Such a beautiful, wonderful story. So that's my reflection on today's lesson. Thank you so much for joining me today. May God bless you abundantly, and we'll talk more tomorrow. Peace be with you.